The egg cracked at 3:47 station time, and Dr. Lena Vasic was the only warm body in the room. She had not planned to be there. The incubation lab on sublevel 4 of the Mordaan xenobiology complex was supposed to be automated temperature-controlled hatching pods, nutrient misters, biometric monitors feeding data to a console 3 floors up where a rotating staff of Mordaan technicians watched readouts and drank bitter root tea. Lena's role as the station's human xenobiologist was advisory. Observe, document, recommend. Do not touch the specimens. Do not interact with the specimens. Do not, under any circumstances, allow physical contact with a Tier 0 organism during its natal imprinting window. The Mordaan had been very specific about that. But the power coupling on Pod 6 had failed at 2:15, and the backup thermal unit had kicked in 11 minutes late, and by the time the system flagged the temperature drop, the egg inside had been sitting at 14 degrees below optimal for nearly 20 minutes. The Mordaan technician on night duty, a broad-shouldered male named Kesoth, whose 4 eyes had been half closed when the alert chimed, had looked at the readout, looked at the egg, and shrugged. "It will either hatch or it won't," he said. "The clutch loss rate on kraelith is 70% in the wild. This is normal." Lena had looked at the readout too. The egg's internal temperature was still dropping. The embryonic heartbeat, a rapid double pulse that she had been monitoring for 19 days, was slowing. She went downstairs. The incubation lab was cold and dark, lit only by the amber glow of the pod status lights. 6 pods in a row, each containing a single kraelith egg, massive, oblong, the shell a deep mottled green-black with veins of mineral deposit running through it like frozen lightning. 5 of the pods hummed steadily, their thermal coils wrapped tight around eggs that pulsed with slow, healthy bioluminescence. Pod 6 was silent. Its coil had gone dark. The egg inside sat in a nest of thermal gel that had cooled to room temperature, and the bioluminescence had faded to a dull, intermittent flicker. Lena pressed her palm against the pod's observation panel. The shell was cold. She knew what kraelith were. Everyone on the station knew what kraelith were. They were the reason the Mordaan xenobiology complex existed, a joint military scientific facility built on the edge of Mordaan territorial space, specifically to study, incubate, and weaponize the single most dangerous reptilian apex predator in the sector. Adult kraelith stood 3 meters at the shoulder, weighed over a metric ton, and were armored in overlapping dermal plates that could stop a plasma bolt at close range. Their jaws could shear through starship hull plating. Their forelimbs ended in articulated claws capable of ripping an airlock door from its frame. They hunted in mated pairs and, when provoked, in packs of up to 12. The Mordaan military had been trying to domesticate them for 40 years, and in 40 years they had lost over 200 handlers to the attempt. No kraelith had ever been successfully bonded to a handler. The Mordaan had hired Lena because she was the only xenobiologist in 3 sectors who had published on reptilian predator imprinting behavior. Her monograph on the nesting psychology of Terran Komodo dragons had caught the attention of a Mordaan intelligence officer who thought correctly that it might contain insights applicable to kraelith natal bonding. She had been on station for 7 months, given full access to observation data and 0 access to the animals themselves. The egg flickered again, dimmer this time. Lena looked at the thermal coil, looked at the manual override panel on the side of the pod, looked at the egg. She opened the pod. The override required a 2-handed grip on a lever designed for Mordaan hands, which were broader than hers by a significant margin. She wrapped both palms around it and pulled. The pod's upper shell lifted with a pressurized hiss, releasing a wave of stale thermal gel vapor. The egg sat in its nest, motionless, its surface cold and dry. Lena reached in and placed both hands flat on the shell. It was like touching stone that had been left in a freezer. The mineral veins were rough under her fingertips, and the shell itself was dense. She could feel the mass of the organism inside, the weight of something alive pressed against the inner wall. The heartbeat was there, faint, transmitted through the shell as a vibration so subtle she almost missed it. Double pulse. Slow, slowing. She did the only thing that made sense to her. She climbed into the pod, sat down in the thermal gel, wrapped her arms around the egg and held it against her chest. A human body runs at 37 degrees Celsius. Kraelith eggs incubate at 42. Lena's body heat was 5 degrees below optimal, but it was 31 degrees warmer than what the egg had been sitting in for the past 90 minutes. She pressed her torso against the shell, tucked her chin over the top of the egg, and felt the vibration of that double-pulse heartbeat stutter, hold, and then slowly begin to speed up. She stayed like that for 2 hours and 16 minutes. At 3:47, the shell cracked. The first fissure ran from the apex of the egg down the left side, splitting along one of the mineral veins with a sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Lena felt it through her entire body, the shell shifting under her arms, the pressure of something inside pushing outward. She loosened her grip but did not let go. A second crack forked from the first, and a chip of shell the size of her fist fell into the thermal gel. Through the gap she saw movement. Wet, dark, the glint of something reflective. An eye. It was amber, slit-pupiled, enormous in the narrow reptilian skull that pushed through the widening crack. The hatchling's head emerged first wedge-shaped, armored even at birth with a ridge of soft protoplates running from brow to the base of the skull. Its nostrils flared, and it breathed in its first air outside the egg with a wet, shuddering inhale that Lena felt against her forearms. Then it opened both eyes and looked directly at her face. The moment lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. The hatchling's pupils contracted in the amber light of the pod's status indicators, focused and locked onto her. Its nostrils flared again, scenting. Its mouth opened slightly, showing a row of translucent teeth no larger than grains of rice. It made a sound, a low, buzzing chirp that vibrated in her chest, and then it pressed the top of its armored head against her collarbone and closed its eyes. Lena's hands were shaking. She held the hatchling through the rest of the shell breaking, supporting its body as it shrugged free of the remaining fragments, and when it finally lay in her arms, wet, shivering, smaller than she had expected, no larger than a medium-sized dog, it curled its tail around her wrist and did not let go. That was the imprint. 19 days of temperature data, 7 months of observation notes, 40 years of Mordaan failure, and the variable they had never tested was warmth. Not thermal coil warmth, not environmental warmth, body warmth. The warmth of something alive holding you while you broke out of the dark. Kesoth found her at 6:10 when he came down for the morning status check. He stopped in the doorway of the incubation lab and did not move for 11 seconds. Lena counted them. "Dr. Vasic," he said. His voice had the specific flatness of a Mordaan male processing something outside his operational parameters. "You are sitting in an incubation pod." "I am." "There is a kraelith hatchling on your chest." "There is." "It appears to be sleeping." "It is." Kesoth's upper pair of eyes blinked twice. His lower pair remained fixed on the hatchling. "You understand," he said carefully, "that what you have done is a violation of 7 station protocols, 2 interspecies contact regulations, and the direct written order of Director Mordaan." "I do." "And the hatchling has imprinted on you." Lena looked down at the creature curled against her sternum. Its tail was still wrapped around her wrist. Its breathing had settled into a slow, even rhythm, and the protoplates along its skull had shifted from the dark gray of a cold-blooded organism to a warmer brown, flushing with the heat her body was giving it. Its claws, each one already sharp enough to score metal, were retracted and pressed flat against her jacket. "Yes," she said, "it has." Kesoth stood in the doorway for another 5 seconds. Then he turned around and went to call the director. Director Mordaan arrived in the incubation lab at 6:48, flanked by 2 military handlers in full suppression gear, armored suits, with reinforced gauntlets, catch poles, and chemical sedation dispensers holstered at their hips. Moravish was a tall Mordaan female with the close-cropped cranial ridge of a senior administrator, and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the building. She stopped 6 meters from the open pod and assessed the situation with the kind of precise, unhurried attention that Lena had come to associate with people who were about to make a decision she would hate. Dr. Vasic. Moravish's voice carried the layered harmonic of a Mordaan speaking through controlled displeasure. Explain why you are holding a Tier 0 weapons-grade organism. It was dying, Lena said. The thermal coupling failed. The backup was late. I provided body heat. It hatched. And imprinted. Yes. Moravish looked at the handlers, looked at Lena. Looked at the hatchling, which had stirred at the new voices and was now watching the director with both amber eyes open, its head pressed sideways against Lena's chest, perfectly still. Remove it, Moravish said to the handlers. The first handler stepped forward. He was experienced. Lena could see it in his movement, the careful lateral approach, the catch pole extended at full length, the weight balanced on his back foot so he could retreat fast. He had done this before, probably dozens of times. He had spent years handling kraelith juveniles in the breeding pens above, and every scar on his forearms told the story of what those juveniles thought of being handled. He got the catch pole to within a meter of the hatchling. The hatchling's eyes tracked the pole. Its protoplates fanned upward along its skull ridge, a threat display that Lena had seen in her observation footage of adult kraelith but never in a newborn. The buzzing chirp changed pitch, dropping into a frequency so low Lena felt it in her sternum. The hatchling's claws extended, all 20 of them. They dug into Lena's jacket, not into her skin, into the fabric, and its body went rigid against her chest. Easy, Lena said. She said it to the hatchling, not to the handler. Her voice was quiet, steady, and pitched in the register she used for field work, the tone that told an animal you were not a threat and you were not afraid. Easy, I've got you. The hatchling's plates lowered, its claws retracted halfway. It pressed its head harder against her collarbone and made the buzzing chirp again, higher now, questioning. The handler looked at Moravish. Moravish looked at Lena. If I take it, the handler said, it will fight. At this age, the stress response could stop its heart. I'm aware of the physiology, Moravish said. Director, it has never done this before. None of them have in 40 years. Moravish stood very still. Her 4 eyes moved from the hatchling to Lena's face and stayed there. Dr. Vasic, you realize that what you are holding was bred to be a military asset. It is not a pet. It is not a research subject. It is a weapons platform that the Mordaan Dominion has invested considerable resources in developing. I know what it was bred to be, Lena said. But right now it's 6 hours old, it weighs 4 kilograms, and it's afraid of the man with the stick. The silence that followed was the kind that redrew lines. Moravish granted provisional custody. 48 hours. Enough time, she said, to determine whether the imprint was genuine or whether the hatchling would transfer attachment to a Mordaan handler once the natal stress subsided. Lena was moved to a sealed observation suite on sublevel 3, a bare room with reinforced walls, a cot, a workstation, and a monitoring array that fed continuous biometric data to the military science division upstairs. The hatchling Lena had not named it yet. Naming it felt like a commitment she was not sure she was allowed to make, spent the first 12 hours of its life pressed against her body. It slept on her chest while she sat at the workstation documenting the hatching. It rode on her shoulder while she ate. It curled in her lap while she read the station's kraelith behavioral database, searching for any precedent for what had happened and found none. At hour 14, it ate for the first time. Lena had requisitioned a nutrient paste formulated for kraelith neonates, a protein-dense slurry that smelled like wet copper and looked like engine grease. She squeezed a ribbon of it onto her finger and held it near the hatchling's mouth. It sniffed, extended a tongue that was dark blue and forked at the tip, and licked the paste off her skin with a delicacy that made her laugh. It ate 7 grams, then climbed back onto her shoulder and fell asleep with its tail looped around her neck. At hour 20, it took its first steps away from her. The observation suite was 4 meters by 6, and the hatchling explored every centimeter of it in a systematic grid pattern that Lena recognized from her research on reptilian spatial mapping. It checked corners, tested surfaces with its tongue, pressed its nose against the ventilation grate, and then returned to her feet and sat down, looking up at her with its head tilted at an angle that on a mammal would have read as expectant. "I know," she said, "it's small." It chirped. "We'll get you somewhere bigger." At hour 36, Mordaan sent the bonding team. 3 Mordaan behavioral specialists in lab coats, accompanied by 2 more handlers in suppression gear. The senior specialist was a female named Dr. Telluri, who had spent her career studying kraelith cognition and had never, in 22 years of research, witnessed a successful imprint bond. "We need to test transfer viability," Telluri said. She was professional, clinical, and visibly fascinated in a way she was trying hard to suppress. "The standard protocol is separation followed by reintroduction with the target handler." "Separation," Lena repeated. "The hatchling is placed in an isolation chamber. After a calibrated interval, a trained Mordaan handler enters and attempts to establish contact. We measure stress hormones, heart rate, and behavioral markers." Lena looked at the hatchling. It was on the cot behind her, lying on its side with its tail curled around a fold of the thermal blanket she had given it. Its eyes were half closed. The protoplates along its spine had developed visible ridging overnight, growing faster than the developmental charts predicted. Its claws made soft clicking sounds against the cot frame when it shifted. "How long is the calibrated interval?" 6 hours. "No." Telluri blinked. "Dr. Vasic, this is a Mordaan military program. The assessment is not optional." "Then change the protocol. Test the bond with me in the room. Introduce the handler while I'm present. If it transfers, you'll know. If it doesn't, you'll know that too, and you won't have stressed a 36-hour-old animal into cardiac arrest for nothing." Telluri looked at the senior handler. The handler looked at the hatchling. The hatchling had raised its head at the new voices and was watching the group from the cot with the focused, evaluative stillness that Lena had already learned to recognize as its processing state. Not afraid, not aggressive, just watching, reading, cataloging. "It's watching us," the handler said quietly. "It watches everything," Lena said. "It started doing that at hour 8. Telluri hesitated, then she agreed. The test handler was a Mordaan male named Grisvath, broad and calm, with the kind of slow, deliberate movements that came from years of working with animals that could kill him. He entered the observation suite without equipment, without armor, wearing only a standard lab coverall. He carried a dish of nutrient paste. He crouched 3 meters from the cot and extended the dish. The hatchling looked at the paste, looked at Grisvath, looked at Lena, who was standing against the far wall with her arms folded. It got off the cot, walked past Grisvath without a glance, crossed the room, climbed Lena's leg, and settled on her left hip with its claws hooked into her belt. Grisvath sat on the floor with the dish in his hands for 4 minutes. The hatchling did not look at him again. "Well," Telluri said from behind the observation window. Her voice came through the intercom speaker. "I think we have our answer." They tested it 3 more times over the next 2 days with different handlers. Each time, the hatchling ignored the handler entirely. It would not eat from their hands. It would not approach them. If a handler moved too close to Lena, the plates along its skull fanned upward and the low-frequency buzz started the vibration that Lena had started calling the warning hum, which the monitoring equipment measured at a frequency that could cause nausea in Mordaan at close range. It was not aggressive. It did not attack. It simply refused everyone who was not her. On day 5, Mordaan called Lena to her office. The director's office was on the top floor of the complex, with a window that overlooked the breeding pen's vast enclosed yards, where adult kraelith paced behind reinforced energy barriers, their armored bodies moving with the slow, heavy deliberation of creatures that knew they were the most dangerous thing in any room they entered. Lena could see 6 adults from the window. Each one was assigned a handler team of 4, and even at this distance she could see the teams maintaining regulation distance, never closer than 10 meters, always armored, always armed. "The bond is genuine," Mordaan said. She was standing behind her desk, which meant she had been pacing. "Telluri's assessment is unambiguous. The hatchling has imprinted on you with a fidelity we have not achieved in 4 decades of the program." "I know. You understand what this means." "I think I do. We bred these animals to be deployed alongside Mordaan military units, bonded pairs, handler and weapon. The entire program exists because kraelith, properly bonded, would be the most effective ground assault asset in the sector. What you have done accidentally, through an unauthorized intervention in a failed incubation pod, is the thing we have been trying to do for 40 years. Except I'm not a Mordaan military handler. No, you are a human xenobiologist on a temporary advisory contract." Lena sat in the chair across from the desk. The hatchling, she had started calling it Kale in her head, though she had not said the name aloud yet, was draped across her shoulders, its tail hanging down her back, its head resting on her left collarbone. It had grown noticeably in 5 days. The protoplates were hardening into real dermal armor. Its eyes tracked Mordaan with the steady, unhurried attention of something that was learning fast what authority looked like. "So what happens now?" Lena asked. "The program directorate wants to attempt a forced transfer, chemical sedation of the hatchling, followed by controlled reintroduction with a Mordaan handler while you are removed from the facility. That will kill it. That is Telluri's assessment as well. She has filed a formal objection. And the directorate has overruled her. The transfer is scheduled for tomorrow at 600. Lena sat very still. The hatchling shifted on her shoulders, not in response to the words, which it could not understand, but in response to the change in her body. Her heart rate had increased. Her muscles had tensed. The hatchling felt all of it through the contact between its belly and her back, and its plates rose halfway along its skull. "I need to see the breeding pens," Lena said. "Why?" "Because if you sedate this animal and drag it away from the only bond it has ever formed, you will lose the only successful imprint in the history of your program. I want to show the directorate something before they make that decision." Mordaan studied her for a long time. "What do you want to show them?" "What a real bond looks like." The breeding pens were not designed for human visitors. The walkways were elevated steel gantries suspended above the enclosures, and the observation platforms were built for Mordaan proportions, the railings too high, the steps too wide, the viewing slits angled for a species that stood a full head taller than Lena. She adapted. She had been adapting to alien-built environments for her entire career. Mordaan had arranged for 6 members of the program directorate to observe from the command platform above Pen 3, which held a mature female kraelith named in the Mordaan inventory system specimen KR-17. KR-17 was 12 years old, weighed approximately 1,100 kilograms, and had killed 2 handlers during a failed bonding attempt 3 years ago. She was considered unbondable, the most dangerous animal in the facility. The hatchling Kale, Lena had decided. She was saying the name now, and it felt right rode on her shoulder as she descended the gantry stairs into the lower observation corridor that ran along the perimeter of Pen 3. Through the reinforced transparent wall, she could see KR-17 standing motionless in the center of the enclosure, her massive head lowered, her amber eyes tracking something that only apex predators track: the minute changes in air pressure and electromagnetic field, that told her another living thing was approaching. Kale saw KR-17 and went rigid on Lena's shoulder. The buzzing chirp started, but different this time. Not the warning hum, not the feeding chirp. Something Lena had not heard before. A rapid, staccato series of clicks interspersed with the low buzz, rising and falling in a pattern that vibrated through Lena's jaw. KR-17's head came up. The adult kraelith's plates fanned fully, a display that in an animal this size was a wall of armored bone, each plate the size of a dinner tray, rising from the shoulders and skull in a crown that made the creature look twice its already enormous size. Her jaw opened. A sound came out, deep, resonant, subsonic, the kind of sound that traveled through floor plating and solid rock. The observation corridor vibrated. On the command platform above, 6 directorate members took a collective step backward. Kale answered. The hatchling's tiny body produced a version of the same call, thin, reedy, absurdly small compared to the adults, and KR-17 moved. The massive female crossed her enclosure in 4 strides and pressed her armored head against the transparent wall directly opposite Lena. The wall held. It was designed to hold. KR-17's amber eyes were centimeters from the barrier. They were not looking at Kale. They were looking at Lena, at the human who held the hatchling, at the warmth that the hatchling was pressed against. Lena did not step back. She stood at the wall with a 1 metric ton apex predator's face centimeters from hers and met its gaze. The hatchling on her shoulder had stopped clicking. Its body was relaxed. Its plates were down. "She's not threatening me," Lena said. Her voice was calm, pitched for the directorate's observation microphones. "She's evaluating me. She can smell the hatchling's imprint markers on my skin. She knows this animal has chosen me. She's deciding whether that choice was right." KR-17 held the gaze for 9 seconds. Then her plates lowered. Her jaw closed. She pressed the flat of her armored brow against the transparent wall in a gesture that Lena recognized from her research footage, the kraelith greeting posture used between pack members. Submission was the wrong word. Acknowledgement was closer. Recognition was the closest. On the command platform, nobody spoke. "That," Lena said, still looking at KR-17, "is what you've been trying to achieve for 40 years. Not domination. Not control, recognition. She doesn't see a handler. She sees someone the hatchling chose, and she's deciding whether to honor that choice." She paused. "If you sedate Kale and rip it away from me, you don't just lose 1 imprint. You prove to every animal in this facility that bonds are things that get broken, and they will never let another handler close enough to form one." The silence from the command platform lasted a long time. The transfer was canceled at 2200 that night. Mordaan delivered the decision personally, standing in the doorway of the observation suite with the expression of someone who had argued for 3 hours and won by a margin she did not like. "You stay. The hatchling stays with you. You will work with Telluri's team to document the bond methodology. Everything you did, the body heat intervention, the vocal patterns, the physical contact protocol, will be formally recorded and tested. And the chemical sedation approach. Suspended pending review. Pending permanently." Morivish's jaw tightened. "Pending review, Dr. Vasic." Lena nodded. Kale was asleep on her cot, its body curled into a tight spiral with its tail covering its nose. It had doubled in size in a week. The dermal plates were fully hardened now, and the translucent baby teeth had been replaced by a set of juvenile dentition that could already score the reinforced surface of the cot frame. It was beautiful, in the way that all apex predators were beautiful, the efficiency of form, the economy of design, every element of its body optimized for a single purpose. It was also, Lena reflected, the gentlest creature she had ever worked with. It chirped when she entered the room. It pressed its head against her hand when she sat down. It slept only when it could feel her heartbeat. It had never, in 7 days of life, shown aggression toward anything except the catch poles that the handlers carried, which it seemed to understand instinctively were instruments designed to separate it from her. On day 9, Grisvoth came back. Not as a test handler this time. He came to the observation suite door with a nutrient tray and stood in the corridor, looking at the hatchling through the viewing port. Kale was lying on the cot with its head in Lena's lap while she read a field journal on Mordaan herpetological taxonomy. The hatchling's eyes were half closed. Its tail hung off the edge of the cot and swung in a lazy arc, ticking against the floor. "It doesn't look like a weapon," Grisvoth said. Lena glanced up. "It isn't. Director Morivish says otherwise. The Directorate's internal memo classified it as Weapons Asset KR-24. KR-24. The K is for kraelith. The R is for the facility designation. The number is its sequence in the breeding registry." Lena looked down at Kale. The hatchling had opened one amber eye at the sound of the new voice, assessed Grisvoth through the port and closed it again. Dismissal, complete and unambiguous. "His name is Kale," she said. Grisvoth was quiet for a moment. "You named a Tier 0 military specimen." "I named a living creature that sleeps on my chest and eats nutrient paste off my finger." "Yes." Grisvoth set the tray down outside the door. He stayed there for another 30 seconds, watching through the port. Then he said very quietly, "I've been handling kraelith for 14 years. I've been bitten, clawed, charged, and knocked unconscious more times than I can count. I've never seen one of them close its eyes in the presence of another living thing. He trusts me. I know, that's what terrifies me." He left the tray and walked away. On day 12, the first incident report was filed. A junior Mordaan technician named Bred had been assigned to collect a blood sample from Kale for Telluri's hormone study. The protocol was straightforward. Lena would hold the hatchling while Bred drew 2 milliliters from the caudal vein. Bred entered the observation suite with a sample kit, approached the cot, and reached for Kale's tail. Kale's plates fanned, the warning hum started, Bred froze. "Wait," Lena said. She shifted Kale in her lap, turning the hatchling so its tail was accessible but its body was still pressed against her torso. She put her hand on the base of its skull, in the soft spot between the protoplates, and said, "Easy, Kale. He needs to take a little blood. It won't hurt." The plates lowered, the hum faded. Bred drew the sample. His hands were shaking, and Lena could see sweat beading on his cranial ridge, but he completed the draw cleanly. As he withdrew the needle, Kale turned its head and looked at him with both amber eyes. Bred took an involuntary step backward. "It was assessing me," he told Telluri afterward. Lena read the incident report later. "Not threatening, assessing, like it was deciding whether I was allowed to do what I just did. And the only reason it decided yes was because Dr. Vasic told it I was." The report went into Telluri's file. Another data point in a dataset that was rewriting everything the Mordaan thought they knew about kraelith cognition. On day 15, a second incident occurred. This one was not in anyone's protocol. Lena had been working at the observation suite's console for 6 hours, writing the preliminary draft of her bonding methodology paper, when the environmental alarm triggered. A pressure seal had failed in the corridor outside, a minor mechanical fault, the kind of thing that happened every few days on a station this size. The alarm was loud, sharp, and sudden. It startled Lena. She flinched. Kale was across the room in less than a second. The hatchling, now the size of a large dog, its armor fully hardened, its claws capable of scoring the reinforced floor plating, launched itself from the cot, crossed 4 meters of floor in a single bound, and placed itself between Lena and the door. Its plates fanned to full extension. Its claws dug into the floor. The warning hum hit a frequency that made the console screen flicker. It was not facing the alarm. It was facing the door, because the door was where threats came from. Lena stood very still. She did not reach for Kale. She did not speak. She waited until the alarm stopped, waited another 10 seconds for the hatchling's heart rate to drop. She could see the pulse in the exposed vascular tissue beneath its jaw plates, and then said, calmly, "Clear, Kale, we're fine." The plates lowered. The hum stopped. Kale turned, pressed its head against her hip, and held the contact for 4 seconds. Then it walked back to the cot, climbed up, and curled into a ball. The entire response had taken less than 3 seconds. Lena sat down and stared at the console screen for a long time. Her heart was beating fast, and it had nothing to do with the alarm. She was thinking about what Tellery had said, that if something threatened her, the hatchling would respond as if its own survival was at stake. She was thinking about what that meant when the hatchling was no longer the size of a dog but the size of a horse, the size of a transport, the size of a building. She picked up the console stylus and added a note to her methodology paper. The bond is not one-directional. The subject does not merely attach to the bonding agent. It defends the bonding agent, reflexively, faster than conscious decision-making. This is not learned behavior. This is neurological architecture. Over the next 3 weeks, Kale grew. The growth rate exceeded every projection in the Mordaan developmental database. By day 14, it was the size of a large wolf. By day 21, it stood hip-high on Lena and weighed 50 kilograms. Its armor had developed the characteristic kraelith patterning, overlapping plates of deep green-black with amber striations that caught the light like embedded crystal. Its claws had reached full juvenile articulation. Its jaw strength, measured during supervised feeding sessions, was already sufficient to deform the alloy feeding trough. It still slept on her cot. It still chirped when she entered the room. It still pressed its head against her hand every morning, and every morning the head was a little bigger, a little heavier, a little more armored, and the gesture was exactly the same. Tellery's team documented everything. The vocal patterns, Lena's low, steady voice, triggered a measurable drop in the hatchling's stress hormones within seconds. The physical contact, the head press, the tail wrap, the habit of sleeping in contact with her body produced oxytocin analogs in the hatchling's blood at concentrations the team had never recorded in a kraelith. The recognition behavior Kale could identify Lena's footsteps from 40 meters, distinguish her voice from any other human or Mordaan voice on the station, and track her heartbeat through 2 walls. "It isn't a pet bond," Tellery said during one of their review sessions. She was looking at the hormone data with the expression of someone whose life's work had just been rewritten by an accident. "It isn't even a handler bond. This is a pack identity integration. The hatchling doesn't think of her as a separate organism. In its cognitive framework, she is pack. She is the defining element of its social structure. Everything else, food, territory, other kraelith, is secondary to her." "What does that mean operationally?" Mordaan asked. She attended every review session now. "It means," Tellery said, "that the hatchling will do anything to stay near her. And if something threatens her, the hatchling will respond as if its own survival is at stake." "Define anything." Tellery hesitated. "Based on the behavioral data, based on what we know about adult kraelith pack defense responses. Director, if something threatens Dr. Vasic, that animal will try to kill it, without hesitation, without restraint, without regard for its own safety. It weighs 50 kilograms. It weighs 50 kilograms now. In 6 months, it will weigh 300. In a year, 600. In 2 years, it will be a fully armored adult kraelith that has spent every day of its life in physical contact with a human woman, and will not recognize any authority higher than her voice." Mordaan was quiet for a while. "What if we need to separate them?" Tellery shook her head. "You don't." The test came on day 29, and it came from a direction nobody expected. Lena was in the lower observation corridor with Kale, running a behavioral mapping exercise near Pen 5. Kale had reached a developmental stage where it needed to see other kraelith not to bond with them, but to learn the species-specific social cues that would let it communicate with its own kind. Lena stood at the transparent wall while Kale pressed its face against the barrier and exchanged low-frequency clicks with the juvenile male in the enclosure. She did not hear the security team until they were already behind her. 4 Mordaan military personnel, not handlers, soldiers, armed with pulse rifles and suppression nets. The lead soldier was a thick-necked male with the rank insignia of a weapons program lieutenant, and he moved like a man following orders he had been given by someone higher than Morivish. Dr. Vasic, the lieutenant's voice was flat. You are to surrender the specimen and accompany us to the military wing. Lena turned. Kale turned with her. The juvenile kraelith's plates fanned upward the moment it saw the weapons, and the warning hum started louder than it had ever been, a vibration that Lena felt in her molars. On whose authority? Lena asked. Dominion command. The specimen transfer has been reauthorized. You will step away from the animal. No. The lieutenant's hand moved to the suppression net launcher on his belt. Dr. Vasic, this is not a negotiation. You're right, it isn't. Lena did not raise her voice. She did not step forward. She stood exactly where she was, her hand on Kale's armored shoulder, and looked at the lieutenant with the same steady, unhurried attention she had given to every predator she had ever worked with. Kale, however, moved. The juvenile kraelith stepped in front of Lena, not beside her, in front of her, interposing its body between her and the soldiers. Its plates were fully fanned. Its claws extended and scored the corridor plating with a sound like tearing metal. Its jaw opened, and the warning hum shifted into something else, a sound that the behavioral database classified as the kraelith territorial defense vocalization, a frequency designed to trigger the fear response in any mammalian nervous system within a 30-meter radius. The soldiers felt it. Lena could see it in their bodies, the involuntary flinch, the widening pupils, the ancient prey-animal reflex that no amount of military training could fully override. The lieutenant's hand stopped on the net launcher. His face had lost color. Behind them, from every pen in the corridor, every kraelith in the facility answered. The sound was enormous. 6 adult kraelith and 11 juveniles, 17 voices joining Kale's in a cascading wall of subsonic vocalization that made the observation corridor's structural supports vibrate. The transparent walls hummed. The lights flickered. The air itself felt thick, pressurized, as if something massive was leaning on the building from the outside. The soldiers did not run, but they stopped. Lena put her hand on the back of Kale's neck between the plates in the soft spot where the armor had not yet closed over the juvenile's rapid growth tissue. She squeezed gently. Enough, she said. Quiet. Steady. Kale's plates lowered. The hum dropped back to baseline. The animal did not move from in front of her, but its posture shifted from active defense to passive barrier, standing guard, not attacking. In the pens, one by one, the other kraelith fell silent. The lieutenant looked at the animal standing between him and his orders. He looked at the woman whose hand was on its neck. He looked at the 17 kraelith in the pens behind him, every one of them oriented toward the corridor, every one of them still. He put the net launcher back on his belt. Tell Dominion Command, Lena said, that the transfer is not happening. Not today. Not ever. This animal chose me, and every kraelith in this facility just told you what they think about someone trying to undo that. The lieutenant did not respond. He turned, signaled his team, and left the corridor. Lena's legs went weak 30 seconds after the soldiers disappeared around the corner. She did not sit down. She could not afford to sit down. Kale was still standing in front of her, his body blocking the corridor, his plates at half extension, and she knew from 3 weeks of watching him that he calibrated his readiness to hers. If she collapsed, he would read it as injury. If he read it as injury, the warning hum would become something else entirely, and every kraelith in the facility was already primed. She put her hand on his neck, steady, firm, the hand that fed him, the hand that cleared the thermal gel from his scales when he was minutes old, the hand that held him against her chest while his shell broke apart around them. "Stand down," she said, not a command, a reassurance, the voice of someone who was not afraid and never had been. Cale's plates lowered all the way. He turned his head, pressed his nose against her palm, and exhaled a long, warm breath that fogged across her wrist. Then he sat, not the alert, wait-forward sit of a guard animal waiting for the next threat. The deep, settled sit of a creature that had done what it needed to do and was finished. In Pen 3, KR-17 echoed the posture. The massive female lowered herself to the enclosure floor, tucked her forelimbs beneath her body, and rested her armored head on the ground. In Pen 5, the juvenile male did the same. One by one down the corridor, every kraelith in every pen settled. The vibration in the floor faded. The lights stopped flickering. Lena stood in the silence and breathed. Grisvoth found her there 20 minutes later. He came alone, no armor, no weapons, carrying 2 cups of the bitter root tea that the Mordaan technicians drank. He handed one to Lena without speaking. She took it. They stood in the corridor, on opposite sides of a juvenile kraelith who was lying across the floor plating with his tail curled around Lena's ankle, and drank the tea in silence. "The lieutenant's name is Orath," Grisvoth said eventually. "Weapons Division. He answers to General Keth Voss, who runs the Directorate's Military Integration Wing. Keth Voss has been pushing for an accelerated transfer since day one. Morivish has been blocking him, but her authority only extends to the Science Division." "Is Keth Voss going to try again?" Grisvoth looked at Kale, at the armored body spread across the corridor, at the claws, each one as long as his thumb, retracted and pressed flat against the plating, at the amber eyes, half-closed, peaceful, the pupils narrowed to contented slits. "After what happened today," Grisvoth said. "After 17, kraelith responded to a threat against a single human female by producing a coordinated territorial defense that shook the structural supports of a military installation." He shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. I think General Keth Voss is sitting in his office right now understanding, for the first time in his career, what a kraelith actually is." "And what is that?" "Not a weapon," Grisvoth said. "Not an asset. A living thing that chooses who it belongs to, and heaven help whoever tries to undo that choice." The aftermath was bureaucratic, which was how Lena knew it was real. Morivish spent 4 days in communications with Dominion Command. Tellery presented the behavioral data to a military review board. Lena wrote a 30-page report documenting the imprint bond, the failed transfer attempts, the recognition event with KR-17, and the corridor incident. She titled it First Contact Bonding Protocol, a framework for kraelith human handler integration. She named Kale in the report. His name. The name she had been calling him since day 5, the name he turned his massive head toward every time she said it, the name that made his plates lower and his eyes soften, and his tail curl once around her ankle before he settled at her feet. The review board's decision came 6 weeks after the hatching. The forced transfer program was permanently suspended. Lena was offered a permanent position as the station's first kraelith bond specialist, a title that had not existed before because the thing it described had not existed before. The breeding program was restructured around her methodology. Body heat intervention during hatching, sustained physical contact during the natal window, vocal bonding, no restraint equipment, no sedation, no separation. Within 3 months, the first new bonding attempts began. Lena trained the handlers herself, Mordaan and human alike, anyone whose temperament cleared the screening criteria she had developed. The protocol was precise. No restraints, no sedation, no catch poles within 50 meters of the incubation lab, body heat during hatching, Sustained contact during the natal window, voice before touch. Touch before food, food before movement. The handler's heartbeat was the first rhythm the hatchling heard outside the egg, and that rhythm became the baseline against which all other stimuli were measured. By month 6, 4 new kraelith had bonded successfully, 2 to Mordaan handlers, 2 to humans. By the end of the first year, the number was 11. The facility's bonding failure rate dropped from 100% to 18%. The injury rate for handlers dropped to 0. The Mordaan Military Directorate stopped using the word weapon in their internal communications. Someone in Telluri's department replaced it with bonded partner. General Kethvas, who had authorized the corridor extraction attempt, submitted a formal request to observe Lena's training sessions. He sat in the back of the observation gallery for 3 consecutive days without speaking. On the 4th day, he approached Lena after a session and said, without preamble, "I have served the Dominion for 32 years. I have commanded divisions, deployed ordnance systems, overseen weapons development programs costing more than most colony budgets. In 32 years, I have never seen a weapons officer achieve what you achieved by sitting in a broken incubation pod and holding an egg." "It wasn't a weapons technique," Lena said. "I know," Kethvas said. "That's the part that took me longest to understand." KR-17, the unbondable specimen, the animal that had killed 2 handlers, bonded to a Mordaan handler named Essek. Essek was a quiet female with slow hands and a voice like gravel over sand. She had failed the standard handler aptitude test twice before Lena intervened and redesigned the screening criteria. The day the bond took hold, Essek stood in the enclosure with her forehead pressed against KR-17's armored brow and wept for 10 minutes while the most dangerous animal in the facility stood motionless and let her. Kale grew into something the Mordaan had never seen. By his first birthday, he was larger than any kraelith in the facility, 3.5 meters at the shoulder. His armor, a deep iridescent green-black that shifted to amber along the plate edges. He weighed 1,200 kilograms. His jaw could shear through bulkhead plating. His territorial defense vocalization could be felt through 3 floors of the complex. He still slept next to Lena's cot. He could not fit on it anymore, so he slept beside it, his massive armored body curved around the base, his head on the floor next to her pillow, his breath fogging the air above her face. Every morning he pressed his head against her hand. The head was enormous, now wider than her arm span, heavy enough to knock her off her feet if he did not control the pressure with absolute precision. He always controlled the pressure. He had never, in 1 year of life, left a mark on her skin. On the anniversary of his hatching, Lena took Kale out of the facility for the first time. Moravish objected, Telluri objected. The security division filed a formal protest. Lena walked through the main gate of the Mordaan xenobiology complex with a 1,200-kilogram apex predator at her side, and the 16 armed perimeter guards watched them go and did not attempt to stop them. The landscape outside the complex was high desert red rock, scrub vegetation, a sky the color of iron. Kraelith were not native to this world. The breeding program had been established here specifically because the environment was too barren to support a wild population, which eliminated the risk of escaped specimens establishing a feral territory. There was nothing here, rock and dust and silence. Kale stood at the edge of the perimeter road and looked out at the empty landscape. His plates were flat. His tail rested on the ground behind him. He breathed the open air in long, deep draws, his massive rib cage expanding and contracting with a rhythm that Lena felt through the soles of her boots. She stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, in the gap between the 3rd and 4th dorsal plates where the armor was thinnest, and she could feel his body heat through the dermal layer. He was warm. He was always warm now. He generated his own heat, independent of any external source, and his body temperature ran exactly 42 degrees, the incubation temperature that the pod's thermal coil had failed to maintain on the night he was born. You could go, she said. Not a command, not a test. Just a fact, spoken out loud, to an animal who could not understand the words but who understood the tone and the heartbeat and the hand on his shoulder, and the absolute absence of fear in the woman who had been the first warmth he ever felt. Cale turned his head and looked at her. The amber eyes were enormous, slit-pupiled, old in a way that had nothing to do with age. He looked at her the way he had looked at her through the crack in the eggshell, focused, locked, certain. He pressed his armored brow against her chest, and Lena put both arms around his head, and they stood like that on the edge of the desert while the wind moved through the silence. Behind them, from inside the complex, the kraelith called. 17 voices, rising together, filling the desert with a sound that was not a warning and not a greeting but something older than either a recognition. A sound that said, "We see you. We know what you are. You are one of us." Cale did not answer them. He did not need to. He was already where he belonged. Lena held him, and the desert held them both, and the first warmth he had ever known stood steady in the wind and did not let go.